welcome back to my channel. I hope everyone's having a lovely day. I have had such like a okay reading year this year. I feel like there haven't been too many books that I've loved, honestly. There have been a few Women's Prize for Fiction books that I really enjoyed and a couple others, but not too much more than that. And I kind of wanted to make like a mid-year wrap-up video because I've seen a few of those or a couple blog posts about that, and I was trying to think like, could I make that? But I don't know, there's not a lot of books that I've been too passionate about. I've kind of talked through the Women's Prize for Fiction books to death, so I don't want to just go back and be like, oh yeah, I loved these like 3 books that I talked so much about, but there isn't a whole lot else that I've read this year, so I kind of scrapped that idea for now. But imagine my surprise when the last couple books that I read, I ended up really loving. So I decided to do sort of like a short review video of 2 books that I just read and really enjoyed both of them, so I really want to talk about them. The first book is called The Birthday Party by Laurent Mauvignier. This book was actually shortlisted for the International Booker Prize this year, so that's how I heard about it. Eric Anderson, another YouTuber that I watch quite a bit, really liked this book, if I'm not mistaken, so I was pretty hyped to read it. It is kind of like an ominous, creepy, slow burn thriller. It's a really big book. There's a lot of like backstory and character perspectives. There's a lot of run-on sentences, and when the first page has one, and I was like reading this and I was not sure if I was into it yet. I was kind of like, I don't really like this. Like I was a teacher's assistant for a while, and I was grading a lot of essays, and whenever there were run-on sentences, I was like immediate like talk points. I mean, not actually, but kind of like it's usually pretty unpleasant to read such a long sentence, but somehow it worked in this book. And again, like I'm not always a fan of super long descriptions either, but it really worked. Like I said, this is a slow burn thriller. It is exciting, but not exciting in the sort of like typical sense that most people might be familiar of with thrillers. Like at least for me, for example, this is the first time I've read a thriller that's kind of like this. And yeah, if you're a fan of like Riley Sager or Lucy Foley kind of thrillers, you might not be as into this. It does go a lot more slowly. It is very ominous, it is very suspenseful, and I like that, and I feel like it did come together in a very satisfying way, but yeah, it doesn't have that sort of like fast-paced excitement where like cliffhanger at the end of every chapter. There are some sort of like cliffhanger type things. There's definitely a lot to wonder about. There is somewhat of a mystery that sort of culminates throughout the book, but it's not as fast moving. I want to just read the back of this book for you because I think it explains it very well, better than I could. And when I was reading this, I was just thinking like, if this was a movie, I don't think I could watch this movie just because of how creepy it comes off. So I'm just gonna read it. Buried deep in rural France, little remains of the isolated hamlet of the 3 lone girls, save a few houses and a curiously assembled quartet. Patrice Bourgeon, inheritor of his family's farm, his wife Marion, their daughter Ida, and their neighbor Christine, an artist. While Patrice plans a surprise for his wife's 40th birthday, inexplicable events start to disrupt the hamlet's quiet existence. Anonymous, menacing letters, an unfamiliar car rolling up the driveway. And, as night falls, strangers stalk the houses, unleashing a nightmarish chain of events. Yeah, I mean, I kind of love horror movies, but I don't know if I can really watch them. This book freaked me out a little bit, but not as much as a horror movie would, I don't think. I definitely felt some anxiety reading this, but I really enjoyed it. It does touch on different kinds of relationships, sort of like bonds people make, both familial and not, like between these neighbors and characters. I feel like every character in this book kind of had a purpose, a sort of, I don't know, reason for being in this story that made a lot of sense. It didn't feel like anyone was kind of like a cheap character. Most characters had like, yeah, a very fulfilling sort of description and I keep saying the word backstory, but that's kind of it. Like you do kind of learn who a lot of these people are, some of their motives. So I really liked that. I really appreciated that about the book. I also really liked the setting, this very isolated little hamlet in this small town that all these characters live in. There's literally 2 houses in this sort of like, it was hard for me to imagine exactly how it looked like, this sort of like little court I kind of pictured it as, of like little farmhouses. No one around for, I don't remember if it says how far, but it seems like no one's around for quite a while. And it is a home invasion book, which is something that terrifies me. So again, I don't think I could handle this as a movie. I think it would work very well as a movie, but I don't know if I could handle it. But I really enjoyed it. A lot of questions get answered throughout the book. Again, it does come very slowly, but yeah, I appreciate that. And I will say the ending, it felt like it ended a little bit too suddenly. That might be my only kind of qualm with this book. It was just a little bit of a snap ending, but overall, super good. Highly recommend if you have the patience for kind of a long thriller. The next book is actually one of the books that I talked about in the 10 books that I want to read this summer video, and it's a Manual for How to Love Us by Erin. And this is a short story collection that I found to be what I think will be quite memorable for me. I probably said in that other video that short story collections don't always work for me. I don't always like reading a short story. I would want it to be longer sometimes, or I just feel like it's not developed enough for me to enjoy it. Or that there's just sometimes like hit or miss short stories in a whole collection, and it's hard for me to kind of like rate a book, not even rate though, just like really parse out how I feel about it when I maybe read one amazing short story and then the rest were kind of like, and it's like, how do I don't know, it feels a little bit weird. I feel like that kind of happened to me in the short story collection Lesser Known Monsters of the 21st Century by Kim Fu, which overall was a pretty good short story collection, but like I was moved to tears in the first short story, and then I think the next few stories after that like just didn't hold my interest as much. There were a few others. There is one short story, I listened to this on audiobook, and there's one short story that I remember every time I like walk by this intersection, I think about it because I was listening to it when I was walking in that area. So I guess there were like a few memorable ones, but nothing that quite hit that first short story, which was very impactful. But I think it was a little bit different for this one. I didn't love every single short story, but I loved quite a lot of them, and I really enjoyed the ones that maybe I didn't love, but like I really liked them. Grief and loss and kind of finding a home and family seem to be like very common threads woven in through all these stories. I think in my last video I talked about there being sort of like a connection between all these stories. I thought I read that somewhere. It's not as closely connected as I thought it was. Like I thought it might all kind of take place in like a similar town or with characters that all kind of, I don't know, were connected in a way. I feel like there's sort of like a brief connection at some point, but not in the way that I thought there would be. So my bad with that kind of, but still there were a lot of like similar themes and beautiful sort of like ruminations that the author had on these topics. It felt like someone was always kind of like mourning something, either another person, the past, or the present situation. And these stories just all felt very like visceral and feral and just full of like longing and life. And I loved them so much. I'm just going to talk about 3 of the stories that maybe had the biggest impact on me, that I liked the most, because I can't talk about all of them. But it started off really strong with the short story called Anywhere, which is about 2 estranged childhood friends who go on a road trip together because one of them has wanted to visit New Jersey for a very long time. The narrator is sort of mourning her friend and the relationship that they used to have in her thoughts throughout this short story, but she realized that despite how they're not as close as they used to be, she will still do pretty much anything for a friend, as is very apparent as we go through the short story. The story discusses the importance of choices and how we can become dependent on other people. I think there was just like a very short sort of comment on the choices we make, but it's something that really stuck with me because it's something I think about all the time, how we're just constantly making choices in our life. Even if it sometimes doesn't feel like we're making a choice by not maybe choosing to do something different, we are making a choice to stay where we are, which for better or for worse, like you might not be choosing to get a new job, but maybe you're happy in your job. But maybe you just are feeling very stuck and you just, for whatever reason, aren't able to or don't want to make that choice. So there was just like a very good passage on that because that's something I think about a lot. And I do want to read another quote from this book as well that I also really loved. I think this quote really speaks to kind of like the dependence we might have on other people. And yeah, I'm gonna read it. People are just people. You can't open them up and crawl inside to shelter yourself from the world, but there should be a way to draw near to the light of a person, to discover them in something like a home. I don't know, it's just a really short quote. Something about it, I just really liked it. So that's like the first short story. Again, started off super strong, and I was worried that what would happen, that it would just not be as strong of the short story collection for the rest of it, but I was wrong. Or I was wrong to worry. The next story I really liked that came kind of shortly after is called The Box, and it's about a couple that will only talk about really serious things in a black box in their basement, as was recommended to the narrator by her therapist. The narrator is sort of trying to hold this marriage together. It's falling apart a bit, largely due to a tragedy in the couple's past that her partner can't really let go of, and it is very much straining her. And at some point, her partner doesn't even want to go to this black box anymore to have these conversations. So you see like a sort of scene of her, or you read a scene of her in the black box alone, and just kind of like her thoughts and her meditations on her life, on love, on death, on home. And it was very beautiful. It was a little heartbreaking. I really enjoyed it. I also really liked when I first like picked up this book from the library, I saw like you can kind of see there's like some black pages. Yeah. Oh my god, I'm trying to like flip it properly. I'll just show you. There you go. There's writing on it. That's from the black box story, which I kind of figured pretty shortly. But yeah, there's just kind of like, yeah, like some writing on them. And I like that. I like that sort of like artistic choice in the book. This was the only story that made me cry, although a few others maybe kind of come close, but there was a conversation that the narrator had with her daughter that just made me cry. It made me tear up a lot. It was a sad story, and just something very sweet that her daughter said just, yeah, made me cry. It was a very good one. It was a very moving one. The last story, that might be my favorite one that I'm going to talk about, was called Crescendo, and it is about a woman who begins to kind of hear this noise, or like crescendoing around her, sort of like buzzing or weird noise, and it's causing her to kind of not be able to go through like the normal daily motions of her life. She loses her job, things are kind of weird between her and her husband, and I found this one to be very relatable. She's very afraid of this noise. Like, she doesn't want to stay awake anymore. She's not able to function, but no one else totally understands that. I think the way that fear or depression or possibly trauma are described through the use of this noise is very well done. I'm not sure if that's 100% what the author was going for, but I suspect it might be, or at least that's how I read it. And yeah, it's about trying to, like, the narrator's trying to find a connection with someone while being very afraid of this noise and feeling this sort of like all-encompassing fear around her. And I related a lot to that. She's trying to have these conversations with her husband, with her coworkers, but it's very hard to bring that up either with someone you know very well or someone you don't. And as someone who suffers from anxiety and possibly kind of unrealistic fears in my life, or just these big fears, I get that. It can be hard to bring these things up. It can be hard to find someone to relate to listen to you. And I mean, if you're going through anything like that with anxiety, with depression or fear, I totally get that. And I think it was presented very well in this story through the use of this noise. There's also a little section I want to read from this one because I just also really loved it. There's a lot of beautiful passages in this book. In general, I think that the author was a poet or is a poet and has written poetry collections before. So it's a very nice like treat when you have an author who writes poetry who now like puts it into another form of writing. But I'll leave you with this one last quote from this book, I guess more like a short little section. I didn't tell anyone about the crescendo, but soon I was on alert for it every moment of the day, flinching at any creak or moan of the building, a cell phone chiming, a distant motorcycle, a sudden burst of laughter in the hallway. I could not bring myself to ask if anyone else heard it for what it was, though I wished to abandon myself so fully to my need that it transcended the restraint of shame. Every time someone passed my desk, a desperation rose to call them over and plead for reassurance that whatever was coming wouldn't destroy us, at least not this time. Or if it would, to know that they were scared too. And we would sit in our fear together as we waited for that final painful note to land. When the impulse crawled up my throat, I swallowed hard and stuffed it back down. So yeah, that's my review of both these books. Highly recommend them both if you're into kind of what I described. Weird, sort of grotesque-ish, visceral short stories, very slow burn, ominous, suspenseful vibes of a thriller. I love them both so much, and it was very cool to read them back to back because, yeah, like I said, there weren't as many books this year that I felt such a strong connection to, and these are two that I think will really stay with me for a while. Yeah, thank you for watching. This is my first sort of like full review video. I know obviously I kind of like review books when I do my other videos, but this was reviews with a purpose, not just talk about a prize or something else. And I hope you're also reading something cool. Again, I highly recommend these. If you have read either of these, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. If you're planning on maybe reading them, I am now trying to go through the 10 books I want to read this summer. That was the first one I finished. I just started the Riley Sager book that I was talking about, his new thriller, which is okay so far. It's okay so far. Yeah. Hope everyone's summer is going well in general too. If you liked this video, please like, please subscribe, leave a comment. Like I say every time, it means a lot to hear from you. And yeah, I will catch you in the next video.